When I talk about the vendor change, vendor means there are two major aspects of a vendor with SSC. Okay, two major aspects of a vendor with SSC. That is, the vendor is a person who is setting your questions, your question papers, extreme, all the questions, everything, the difficulty level, etc. Everything is taken care of by the vendor. This is one major aspect of a vendor. The other major aspect is the vendor is conducting the examination. So the third one is they provide the software also, but I have not mentioned that because that is not relevant. So the second major aspect is they are conducting the examination at the center. So they are providing centers, they are having tie-ups with centers, they are giving you, allotting roll numbers there. Everything is being taken care of. So these are the two major aspects of any vendor. So far, TCS has been taken care of both these things. Though there was a bifurcation at maybe 2 years back, there was a bifurcation. They had requested, they had broken it down into two categories and had expected that there will be a separate vendor for each category. But that could not be materialized, and it is still TCS who is taking care of this. Now here, before we jump to the main question, is vendor change connected to these reforms? Is what is the main problem here? Is what is the main assumption which the students are drawing, that okay, there has been some big reform which has happened and now finally the vendor change has been announced immediately. Apparently, if you look at the history, last year also, I think 15 days, 20 days or a month before the examination, I would believe, or yeah, a month and 2 months before the examination, there was a buzz about vendors being changed because SSC, oh yeah, I might not be visible because there's a light cut, but don't worry, I am still live here. So there was a buzz around SSC trying to, SSC opening tenders for a vendor change. That did materialize up to a level, but it was cancelled, it was called off, and TCS was extended for another year. Now technically, these vendors are for a maximum period of 5 years, including extensions, they can be employed. Despite that, 2018 was when TCS started, so technically it has already been 6 years, right? So this is an this is an appropriate time when the vendor had to change, even if the reforms were not coming into picture, even if things were not, even if there was no revolution of sorts, the vendor probably had to change now. Now the biggest question which arises from this is, how will it affect us? Number one, is the date going to change? So in 2018, when the vendor was changed and TCS came into picture, the dates changed with a very huge margin. So obviously, if the vendor is going to change now, maybe 3 months into the examination, there will be some change. There will be at least a change of 2-3 months, at least a quarter, it will shift back. But there can be a probability that this year also TCS conducts the examination and then immediately they go for a tender which they will apply from next year onwards. Maybe, though the probabilities are quite less because now the buzz is a lot, and maybe they're expecting to get a tender out and a vendor in as soon as possible, right? So there are bids around it and there are names floating around, but I'm not sure they are going to finalize a name which might be controversial. I'm sure a lot of you know about what I'm talking about. I don't want to take names here. Yes, so this is one aspect. The other aspect is, what about the relevance of PYQs? The relevance of PYQs. Now, if I'm not sure whether I'm sure a lot of you were not those students who had given your examinations toward 2018 or before, but I have seen those students, I have mentored such students. I have seen the questions which were asked in 2015, 2016. The level of questions were quite good, right? But the format, the types were absolutely similar. There was no difference in the types of questions. If there was a question in logical reasoning on syllogism, it is still being asked in the same way. If there was a question on logical reasoning on coding decoding, it is still being asked in the same way. If there was a question of mensuration, it is still being asked in the same way. Arithmetic, still being asked in the same way. English, still being asked in the same way. The level is changing because of the vendor. Most probably that is what can be expected, and there also you cannot expect this to raise to maybe a CAT level or MBA level or some other level. Level is going to be somewhat at par, maybe +1, -1, that's it, right? But the syllabus is going to remain the same. The topics are going to remain the same. There is not going to be any change as far as your studies are concerned, and there is not going to be any change as far as the type of questions are asked. Maybe there might be a mixture of them, but the types more or less are going to remain the same. So what is the relevance of PYQs? The relevance of PYQs for repeat, I think, is almost eliminated now. So for the last few years, a notion was built that TCS often repeats questions as it is, ditto, without changing data. That might not happen anymore, because if the vendor changes, they are not going to pick up questions from TCS or from the previous year questions, because the banks are going to change. But for practice, they are still a valid source. So if somebody is going through a PYQ course, a PYQ syllabus, a PYQ series, or if you are referring to previous year questions, please refer with two things in mind. Number one, these were how questions have been asked in the past, and for practice, this is what is required. This is the level of the examination which I can expect. But plus minus 1 is always advisable. So that is what you need to keep in mind.